Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We have been having some technical issues, but finally we are here. Thanks for your patience, and I promise we will finish on time. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. It's a real pleasure to share this IFRIT session with you. As you know, we are here at the Caribbean DPI Summit in Jamaica, and I thank Maurice for a very welcoming session yesterday, and I'm sure that the intersection of talking about open data, AI, and DPIs, it's really relevant, and I'm sure that we will have a very insightful conversation here with my colleagues from the D4D network. So, as you may know, the D4D network is an alliance of Global South research organizations, and we are working to mobilize knowledge needed to advance the use of data and data technologies to advance development in our regions. And also the network seeks to shape a more inclusive, responsive to challenges by bringing Southern perspectives on the use and impact of data for development. So thanks, everyone. And here, I'm very glad to welcome my colleagues, Natalia Carfi, Executive Director of the Open Data Charter, Maurice McNaughton, also from the Caribbean Open Data Institute and the Mona Business School, our host here during the summit, Nicolas Grossman, it's a project director of the Global Index on Responsible AI. Ed Batal, the CEO of Intellibus, that's joining us online. We should be seeing him shortly. And also Muchiri Nyanga, Executive Director of the Local Research Institute, LDRI. And as we have been discussing yesterday here, digital public infrastructure is emerging as a foundational component of digital transformation, enabling inclusive access to digital services, fostering economic growth, and supporting governance innovation. DPI encompasses key elements such as digital identity systems, open payment platforms, digital wallets, but mostly interoperable data exchange mechanisms, forming the backbone of digital economies worldwide. And here in this conversation, that's why open data becomes so relevant, and also open data as an important and needed element of AI, and that's also why Nico is joining us, and what's the intersection of open data and AI in the digital public goods conversation. So I will just mention 3 key ideas to prompt the conversation, and then I will make some questions to my colleagues and we can start this dialogue. First, we will cover an idea on how open data is understood as a digital public good, balancing access with privacy, security, and ethical considerations. Also, what's the role of open data and AI in the DPI's conversation, and how open data and AI initiatives can contribute to innovation, transparency, and civic engagement. And finally, a third idea, including the perspective on how data for development and DPIs is leveraging digital infrastructure for financial inclusion, public service delivery, and governance innovation through open data. So I would like to start the conversation with my colleagues with a key and direct question. And we can start maybe here with Maurice, that is next to me. How can international organizations, civil society, and academia collaborate more effectively to promote open data sovereignty and ensure DPI serves the broader goals of sustainable development? So, Maurice.
Thank you, Gloria. Good morning, everyone, both here on location and online. Really delighted to be having this conversation, and in particular to be having it here in Kingston, Jamaica. Can't think of a better place to do so. I think, Gloria, the question is, how do we collaborate? That has been such a recurrent theme at the DPI Summit here in Kingston. Especially for areas like the Caribbean, just emphasizing the critical importance of the collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, civil society, and academia. And it's I think one of the notions that came out, I'm trying to recall the expression. If you want to go fast, do it alone. But if you want to go far, you do it collectively, together. And then we heard this morning, well, we really need to go fast. So let's go fast and far using modular implementable solutions like that we just heard about. But I think that collaboration comes from, as we've been having in this discussion, first of all, political will on the part of the public sector to be prepared to engage both with private sector and civil society. I think that it also relies on significant capacity building. I mean, capacity building has been one of the sort of central pillars for us at the Caribbean Open Institute. And we believe one of the barriers to achieving what can be accomplished with inclusive digital infrastructure is building capacity. And we talk about building capacity in terms of digital skills, digital literacy, and we're looking at it across the board. So civil society at large, in the public sector, and in the private sector. To me, that is the critical, if not the most critical enabler. We have to be able to build capacity, and we have to find ways to do that such that it is scalable. So to me, Dora, those are some of the key things to facilitate that kind of collaboration.
Thanks, Maurice. I think you mentioned important and key elements: political will, capacity building, and the capacity also to scale solutions. But now I will go with Nati. What do you think about it?
So thank you first for putting up the whole summit and this panel in particular. For everybody that knows the Open Data Charter, we are about to turn 10 years. So we've been around the digital conversation for a long, long time now. And we see collaboration as the cornerstone of implementing open data policies. I'm Latin American. We've seen how the Latin American community has been collaborating for a long, long time. We do have the longest running regional open data conference, and still pretty much out there. The new dates have just been announced. And we've seen how governments collaborating among each other can actually help make the pace faster, because we already know a lot of do's and don'ts. We've already tried different types of policies, different types of regulations, some that worked, some that didn't. So as we do not need to reinvent the wheel, collaboration is critical so that we don't waste time, but most importantly, we don't waste public funding in the implementation of policies. We do think that also collaboration between civil society organizations and governments is critical for the implementation of open data policies, because we need to understand that, of course, publishing data is not free. It's not something that is done overnight. So getting the demand side of data in the conversation from the get-go, understanding the demand side while you create the publication plans, kind of creates a virtual cycle where the data that is being open is going to be reused for sure, because it was already demanded. And we've seen also how civil society organizations collaborating through different countries can also help promote a more healthy ecosystem and a more healthy conversation with governments, because once again, there is a lot of learnings that we've already gone through. So yeah, we've seen the conversation on collaboration here in the summit, and I do think it's one of the cornerstones of any digital implementation, successful implementation. And one of the things that we've been saying in the Open Data Charter, it started out as a small joke that I said in one of the conferences, but then it actually got really clear that it was something important. It's not just about data interoperability, it's about people interoperability. We need to connect working teams in order to make a successful digital policy. So let's interoperate data and people.
Thank you. Nico.
Thank you very much, Gloria. First of all, thanks, Maurice and the organizers for the invitation, for being here. Is this working properly?
Is it working properly?
Hello? Yeah? Now? Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, talking about the cooperation, I think this is a topic that has been raised in this event and in many other conversations. And I think it's a good moment to think how we move from the plans and the intentions toward action. And I think that what Nati was raising is very important, to think about people and how can we make these teams interact. And I would also like to bring to the agenda how the different agendas toward digital inclusion and digital technologies and SDG can come together, because sometimes also these works towards this agenda are fragmented. So even though, for example, compromises like the Global Digital Compact aims to have a comprehensive overview, then we have the responsibility agenda from one side, the open data agenda in other side, the DPI agenda now we have in other side. And obviously there are a lot of core components that are, sorry? Okay. Thank you. So yes, I was. So yes, I was also talking about that. This has to be human-centered, how the teams can collaborate, but also in this more bigger picture on the different agendas toward digital technologies and SDG needs also to work together, because we share obviously foundations for the work that we do, but also a lot of principles that are very, very common. So I call for this, keep working together in these different spheres of the digital inclusion.
Thanks, Nico and Nati. I think you brought something really important and relevant in terms of, one, connecting agendas, but also don't forgetting that this is about the people. It's not the technology, it's not the data, it's not AI, it's people who's going to be benefited or impacted by these implementations. Should we change? I don't. Okay, and now I would like to jump to the people that it's joining online, Ed and Muchiri. Also, if you can give us your thoughts. Ed, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Hi, Muchiri, we can see you now. Thanks for holding open.
Thank you.
So
I hope
Ed,
you can hear me.
amazing. So Muchiri, can we jump to you, and in terms of how do you think international organizations, civil society, academia can collaborate more, and also how we can enhance and collaborate more to promote open data sovereignty and ensure DPI serves the broader goals of sustainable development?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for the invitation to participate. I am heartbroken that I'm not in Kingston. Maurice, next time we have to do a do-over, man. I demand a do-over. But we do have an important role that we can play together in collaboration. I think multi-stakeholderism has been part of our approach to work in open data and consequently all the adjacent areas of AI, DPI, DPGs. And I think the thing that we have an opportunity to collaborate on, and something that gives us an opportunity to work together so that we can go further, is the adoption of shared values and shared language, so that we can have better measurement of what we're doing. So even as I sit here today, I'm at a conference on AI sovereignty and the question of data and mapping power dynamics was a big part of the conversation today. It's very clear that just one of us can't do that alone. We need to work together for that shared values, and so we can have a shared measurement. And I'm very proud of the work that the Global Center for AI Governance is doing, leading us on the work of the Global Index on Responsible AI, because that's a good example of something that brings people together, so we can measure and tell, are we being inclusive? Is this really getting to where it's supposed to be? And so that measurement piece for me is a really big one. Thank you, Gloria.
Thanks, Muchiri. Now that you mentioned the URI or even other instruments like, for example, the GDB, I think there are great excuses to bring people together, and especially, as Nico mentioned, like to also connect the topics. No, it's not that we are talking in different spheres. So Ed,
Exactly.
welcome.
And we're looking forward to GDB too, coming up soon.
Exactly. We will have the results this year very soon in May, so please keep tuned. And also, Ed, now that we can see you now also, and what are your thoughts about the interconnection of these topics?
So thank you again, Maurice, for having me here. I know I would love to be in person, like Muchiri said right now. So apologies. I'm actually in Vancouver, if you can see behind me. And finally, it's not raining here today, so it's nice and sunny. I'm able to see the sunny Vancouver today. So
I think Maurice and I have talked about this at length. But for the benefit of others, I think one of the critical things is even the awareness, and only through collaboration that awareness can come. There is general lack of awareness and apathy. I was at the UN in February, and I was challenged. There were 48 countries in the room, 500 people, and I did not mix my words. I was clear, even though the publicist told me don't use these words. I said, no, we live in an era of digital slavery. Let's not make no bones about it, right? You can sidestep it, you can hide it, you can give, nice goody words around it. You don't own your data. You very soon will not own your digital twin, and your virtual assets that you think you own, you don't actually own them, because people who hold those servers own that data. So even if you think blockchain data is owned by you, it's not. It's the people who actually run and host those servers. So in the end, we don't own our digital selves. That is the harder problem to contend. And only through collaboration and conversation can that come out. Then the question becomes, what is the definition of open data? The company that has given us this, at least brought this awareness to us of AI at massive scale through ChatGPT is called OpenAI. But there's really nothing open about it. Right? So there are some hard questions to ask. I'm actually here. The reason I'm not there with you guys in the room and I'm here is because I came all the way here because I've been trying to get a hold of Sam Altman, and finally this Friday I'll be getting a hold of him to challenge him with this question in face to face. And the bottom line is, we can talk all about greater good, but what are we doing about it is the question to me. And the harder thing is, what are we doing? And so Maurice has been very kind, and we've been collaborating to help put together, and with Sandre Maynard and several others, to put together finally a version of a global digital policy. I know there are a lot of efforts, with all due respect to all the efforts around the world. We need a version, a draft, a public draft that we can all, again, use as a means for collaboration. And policy is step one. Then the next is regulation. And the next missing piece that often we don't talk about, we go from regulation directly to standards and ethics. But the piece that is missing in the world is ontology. Because open data is truly possible if everybody agrees on the definition of what open data is in the first place and what that data model should look like. So a big part of what I think is missing here, and which is what, thanks to the collaboration with UV, will be possible, is establishing a unified ontology, which is why, for those of us who might have already seen the backpacks with the big WDG logo on it, the World Digital Governance logo on it, that effort is really about that. It is about getting people on that common definition on what that ontology or the data model looks like. So I think really answering those questions, and I liked what Chiri said earlier, as well as what Nico and Nagia said earlier. I think the key there is a principle-centered approach, and who owns the data. And often I get asked the question, hey, there are so many countries in the world, why Jamaica? And this was a very serendipitous find for me. Every country in the world, the government owns your data. You have the right to information as a citizen. Jamaica is the only country which has actually passed a law, quite serendipitously, where you, the citizen, own your data as a fundamental human right. I think it's a very big thing. And if everyone here in the room, I would give a big clap and a pat on the back for Jamaica.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. I think those are very interesting insights, but also I think that you kind of open up the floor, but also for new questions, no? Like even like thinking about the concept and the impact and what open data means. And I think in some forums, we also see like in terms of how the discussion around data, around open data and the ownership of data, it's now changing, no? Especially with AI coming into the discussion. And as you mentioned, like these new companies, like using data that it's all over the internet, but without asking anyone how and why they're gonna use it. I think maybe we can change to gallery view, but open the camera so they can see us and we can, yeah. So we can also, because I think right there, they are not seeing us. Can we open this camera? Yeah? Okay, super. Just to try to be as interactive as possible, sorry. Okay, so I will follow up with one question to Maurice in terms of, and with Jamaica example that Ed was talking and explaining before, how can governments balance openness in data sharing, but with robust privacy and security protections? Do you think, are there any successful examples or even not that successful, but lessons learned in that intersection around protection, privacy, and data governance to achieve this balance?
So it's a delicate balance, and it's interesting. So we've been collaborating with Ed for the past several weeks. And when he said to me that Jamaica is one of the few places where the Data Protection Act or the Data Privacy Act actually explicitly references the citizen as the owner of their data, I said, well, that's interesting. I kind of took it for granted, but he has obviously been looking at it across multiple jurisdictions. So I thought that was interesting. I think, Gloria, to your question about balancing openness with the sort of protections of privacy and so forth, it has always been a challenge in the open data landscape, and we've been at this now for the better part of a decade. And to be fair, I think a lot of our governments, particularly here in the Caribbean, have taken an all or nothing approach. There's either they embrace open data and, like in the Dominican Republic, there's an active process of making data available to citizens, or there's a very closed approach. And we see very sort of little, certainly from my perspective, very little sort of balanced approach in between those two ends of the spectrum. And I think that it is something that it really is going to require the kind of, and I always, maybe it's because of my academic university groundings, but I always come back to the issue of education and capacity building. I think that we have not managed to do enough with our public sector or policymakers or government officials in terms of understanding this whole sort of digital sphere, especially as it relates to data. So things like data protection legislation, data privacy, those get deployed because it's a kind of natural way that governments think. We're closing the door on these things. Whereas open data requires long conversations and negotiations to get to that end of the spectrum. And so we never find the right balance between those two. And yeah, I think education. Later this afternoon, we're going to hear from a team from India that has done scalable public sector education to the tune of millions. And we have to learn from examples like that, because if we can't empower and enable our governments, and in particular the decision makers and the policy makers, to understand this landscape, then we're going to continue to be struggling with finding that balance. And we end up on one end of the spectrum or the other, more often than not, the closed end of the spectrum.
I think it's amazing also how we can learn from the past. And I think, as you mentioned, with all the work that many organizations like the Open Data Caribbean Institute, or even the Charter, or even ILDA, for example, the Latin American Initiative on Open Data, it's that there are a lot of lessons learned, there are a lot of challenges that have been overcome. And I think also those learnings can be translated to these new conversations, but also to make the new questions, in terms of AI, what are the needs that, and how we need to understand the role of data, the role of open data, but also in terms of education and skills, and also how to take these conversations outside of these rooms. How do we go out of our bubbles to discuss this with people outside, how we promote civic engagement in these topics, how do we increase interest, and especially how do we make this kind of easier to understand, and it's not just about the technical side of these conversations. And also, Nati, now I will jump to you and with the next questions in terms of the experience of the Charter and your own personal experience also. What are the most significant barriers to implementing open data initiatives in regions like the Caribbean, Latin America, or even, for example, countries in Africa?
Thank you so much. And I think the first big barrier that we've seen for open data policies worldwide actually is that it's not about the digital aspect of it, it's the cultural change that needs to happen in order to have a successful open data policy. We still have many conversations with different governments from around the world where you get civil servants saying like, why do they want my data? And it's not your data, it's the data you're creating, but it's actually citizens' data. So that shift in the mentality of civil servants, public servants, and the whole government, it's I think one of the biggest barriers that we've seen, and we've had that same conversation in countries in Latin America, in countries in Africa, in Central Asia. Like it doesn't matter where you go, that happens everywhere. And cultural change actually takes time. So we need to be patient and have those conversations over and over again. But one of the challenges that builds on that is changes of administration. So you're working with one team, and then election comes, and the team might be changed, erased, whatever, and so you need to start all over again. So building on that, another one of the challenges is the data governance regulatory frameworks. There is a lot of countries that do not have specific regulations for open data that could bring a little bit of more sustainability or stability to open data policies. Because when there's a change of administration, if the regulatory framework is in place, you cannot kind of erase everything. You can, but like the idea is that you cannot, and then civil society organizations, journalists, academia can actually hold on to the regulatory framework to go to the new administration and say, okay, so we have this in place, we need to keep working on this. And in that conversation, the privacy aspect of data governance is more stable. Like there's more regulatory frameworks and laws in place for privacy and for data protection. So that brings a more stable conversation. So we do have the cultural change, we have the regulatory frameworks, but fortunately, there is a lot of conversations now happening, like open data is back into the digital conversation because of AI. Data is the backbone of DPIs, is the backbone of AI. We do need to get those regulatory frameworks in place. And in those countries that do have regulatory frameworks, they need to update them to the new reality and the changing pace of data governance. And fortunately, we're seeing that at the UN level, but we're also seeing that at regional levels. There's an African conversation around AI. There's the work that Gloria, you've been leading with the Organization for American States for a data governance framework for data and AI. So there's those conversations are already happening. What we need to take a look at it's how participatory those processes are being and how much work from outside of government is coming into those processes, and from the civil society perspective, like we need to be there and we need to advocate and we need to collaborate also among ourselves to bring in a more stronger position to those conversations. Meeting those challenges, I think we do have opportunities. For example, the DPI conversation can be actually an opportunity. The building up of interoperability platforms can help secure more standardized and sustainable data publication. So those data sets that will be running or are running through the interoperability platforms can be open in a more sustainable way. So that's an opportunity. And as I said, the conversation and the need to have the conversation around data governance for DPI and for AI, I think it's an opportunity to bring back the conversation on openness. Access to information is a human right. We need to put that in the middle of the digital conversation.
Thanks, Nati. I think that's amazing, and especially talking about access to information, like kind of this big umbrella, and especially at this time in the world, like how we guarantee and how we protect that human basic right. And now, Michiri, I will go back to you. And also in terms of, and I think it's super connected, the next question that we have here, in terms of engagement, in terms of involvement of citizens, and maybe you can tell us about maybe some specific cases where open data has helped to enhance civic engagement or transparency in the delivery. So let's see, we can.
So
yeah, there you go.
I have two quick examples. One is not quite open data; it's more shared data. But I think it does signal what is possible and why we should continue working on these things. So Kaduna State is one of the OGP locals. If you're familiar with the Open Government Partnership, for those who don't know, it's a multilateral initiative of governments and reformers working to increase transparency and accountability and participation across government, and trying to do that progressively across the government through action plans across periods of time. And Kaduna State, I think going back maybe 2015, thereabouts, set up under that idea, set up this a project of calling Eyes and Ears. It's essentially a service that's web-based, but also has an app that allows for the general public to look on the app and see all the projects that are within a 2-kilometer radius of wherever they are. It allowed them to get information about the project, take a picture, verify that the information is correct, or give feedback on whether it's working or not. And that created a new opportunity for this for the civil service and the state to modify their behavior around how they were managing projects, how resources were being expended or not towards the designated purpose. That was very successful. From what we've observed over time, a number of other states in Nigeria started looking at the Eyes and Ears project as one of the things that they could do themselves to advance transparency and accountability and drive participation. Because although you have all these other barriers that keep people from getting online, like the cost of internet, cost of devices, cost of energy, etc., you still had the members of the public going on the app and providing very targeted feedback on projects that are important to them and that are within their areas. And that was a very good example of open data being leveraged to provide people with an opportunity to exercise their agency. And it had the additional advantage of not overloading them with information, because imagine that must be a massive data set that was sitting behind that infrastructure. And that data set, for me, is a very good example of a digital public good that became available, continued to be updated, at least for a time. I don't know if it's still running. I haven't followed it up for a minute, but I think that's an example of open data driving participation and getting citizens engaged. The second example, which I said is not quite open, it's more about shared data, and one of the things that allows us to see what's possible is from Kenya. So the way the political party governance architecture is set up here, every political party is free to, of course, recruit members and sign them up. But when you sign up your members, they go into a national database. So there's a single database that has every single member of a political party in the country. So once you're registered, if you're not happy with the party and you want to leave, you have to go back to that party, physical offices, fill out a form. In some instances, I think pay some money, and hand in your resignation. But because there are incentives for the political parties in regard to how many members they have, they were very slow in activating that resignation in the national database. So you would think you've resigned from your party, but you'd come back, months later and find out you're still a member. And to find out whether you're a member was also a very long process. You'd have to go to this single part of the government, the office of the registrar or political parties. Now that's important background, because that means the vast majority of members of the public didn't know whether they were members of a party of the party they thought they were members of, and an even larger majority didn't know they were members of political parties because somehow they got enrolled somehow. So fast forward to a couple of years ago, and the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties finally integrated their system with the national digital services aggregation infrastructure that has a lot of other things, including ID, payments, and all that, and is used for other services that are paid. Like if you want to register a company, you go onto this platform, you find that particular service for registering a business, and you fill out the form, then you make your payments, and everything just kind of works paperless. The moment the political parties register was added to this infrastructure, there was mayhem, because so many people found out that they were members of political parties and they'd never signed up. And now they had the additional advantage of not having to go to a party's office. They didn't have to go fill out papers and stuff. They just needed to click and resign from within this digital infrastructure that is public and available. And then just like that, you're no longer a member. And that data is real time, it's updated, and puts the agency back in the hands of the people in a way that is actually what I believe has always been intended. Now, if that digital infrastructure, that DPI that includes the ID, the ID system and the ability to connect these different parts of government and these very different services together, if that wasn't available, the level of engagement that we saw, the civic engagement around political parties, around the political process, I think would have remained a dream. Yeah, and I think what we have now in terms of the agency and the excitement and the energy that we've seen even in the last year with our Gen Z protest on the financing of government and all of that, I think has been made possible because some of that digital public infrastructure and some of the underlying digital public goods are available. And that's really maybe two examples of what is possible if we put our money and our efforts in the right places. I think the concern is only that, how do we make sure that these things continue to be available? And Nati talked about some of the transitions that we worry about when there are no policies and no regulations. If a lot of these move.
You got, Muchiri, you got like freeze on the screen, but yeah, we can continue just to, okay, let's see if Muchiri can come back. But I think, well, he mentioned specific challenges that sometimes are not about the technology, but about the willingness of the people in power to change things. And also how maybe it's just a digital, simple solution that can have a great impact, and just like things like sharing data on platforms, for example. And I think that's also something key to think about, and something that has been mentioned before, like in terms of simplicity and scalability and impact. It's not about the most complex technology, it's just about sometimes like connecting some dots. So Ed, I will continue with a question for you, and I really celebrate your participation in this webinar, because sometimes we lack this conversation with the private sector, no? And I think it's also right now with all the DPI discussion, I think that's a bridge that we need to kind of build in a stronger way. My question to you will be, what's the role that you see for the private sector stakeholders in supporting the development of DPIs and open data as a digital public good, but ensuring ethical data use?
Sorry, I was speaking on mute. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Thank you for that. So I think it's a very interesting question. What is the role of the private sector more broadly, right? One would argue that the role of the private sector is to, and again, I'm thinking maybe from the capitalistic view of the economy, right? So the capitalistic view of the economy will say that the role of the private sector is to make sure we have a very efficient market, meaning goods and services are produced with the most efficient allocation of capital, and we have the best price products available to every consumer. But simplistically, how does the private sector do that? I think private sector is largely in the business of not only creating products and services, right, from mining iron ore to creating a finished iPhone that you can see in your hand, but the jobs that are required as part of this whole journey. And I think the role of the private sector is to be the guardian of those jobs. Now, that is not to say that the nature of these jobs will not change. So if you look at one of the statistics, because of the baby boomer generation, almost 1.2 billion people around the world will retire in the next 5 to 10 years. And the number of people that are being produced to take those jobs are only 433 million. So while we are worried about AI taking jobs away, there is a huge delta between the people retiring and the people coming into the job sector. So this is one problem that the private sector has to solve. I don't think governments alone can solve this. There is a much bigger problem. And again, this is no offense to universities. I've been affiliated with NYU and UV, and with all due respect, I say this in the humblest way possible. There is a delta between what the universities produce versus what the private sector needs. And this is not to put down any university or anything. There is a delta, and we all recognize the delta, because the university produces a certain kind of person, and there is always a delta between what the private sector needs. So private sector has to necessarily, because only private sector knows what they want, they have to necessarily collaborate more closely with the university. to ensure that that delta is bridged. Now, this was a historical problem. It's not a new problem. AI has made this problem order of magnitude worse because the rate of change of skill requirement is accelerated. There are new skills, the entire shift in jobs that will become irrelevant and new jobs that are required. And there is so much sort of anxiety around that because people don't even know. I get asked all the time, oh, should I send my kid to college? Are they going to learn anything relevant? Right? And the retention rates across the world, the retention rates and the enrollment rates are dropping, especially in the United States for colleges and universities. So there is a huge role the private sector can play in collaboration. This is why I believe that our UV collaboration is so critical. Because without that, the private sector coming together to collaborate, we have a huge gap. Now comes the question of what has that got to do with open data and how data fits in. And I think job creation is a foundational place where data. So one of the projects that we are working with very closely, collaborating with UV and with the Pro Vice Chancellor Sandra Maynard and others, is the AI Academy. And the AI Academy that we are launching in Jamaica, in fact, we've already announced it and we've enrolled the first batch of 20 people and another 100 before the end of the year. The purpose of the academy is to bridge that gap. And where open data fits in that is, if you think today the way, and this is the experiment we are running now in Jamaica, and once this is successful, the idea is to spawn it across the whole Caribbean and the global South. And the hypothesis is very simple. Foundationally, skill data is a very critical piece of data. And it goes back to open data and who should own the data. So there are three buckets in which we can think about data and data ownership, and largely just to make it easy to understand. Citizen data, meaning your data as an individual, my data as a person, any photograph I take, anything I fill in a form, information about me, my body. You go to a doctor, you take your physical measurements, right? Or you go and take a test, you get some results, right? As a consequence of that. So there's physical data about the individual. That's the citizen data. Then there is organizational data. University will collect its own data. University will say, oh, I gave you an exam, so that's my data. Yes, it is also your data, but whose data is it really, right? So then comes the question of this parties to a data in a transaction. And then there is a question of government data, because government is yet another organization in my mind. But yes, it is a more valuable organization in the sense it is also supposed to be the protector and the guardian of all society, right? It keeps order in society. So it has a slightly higher order role than the organization, because organizations follow the rules made by the government. And the government is of the people, for the people, by the people. Again, in countries where such is the case. So those are the dimensions to consider. And importantly, private sector's role is, and how are we doing this, for example, for jobs? We're taking a simple example. We're saying the citizen, which is the student in this case, their data is stored on their phone. There will be a simple app where they will have a private, highly distilled LLM that will sit on their phone. Their data will be stored there. Every time they take a test or anything else, that data is by default stored there. Now, university wants that data, employer wants that data, they have to request, and that goes through a central DPI exchange. So this is where we are collaborating with the AI task force in Jamaica and other stakeholders to ensure that that DPI infrastructure is then integrated with the national ID. Now, similar models have been tried in other countries, but not keeping the ownership with the citizen. Estonia has tried a model, India has tried a model. The data has still always stayed with the government or with the institution. And this is where it becomes a challenge, because then I think Athena was making that point, like how do you convince the government that changes every 4 years that, it's not your data. And they'll always argue, no, but it is the government's data. So it's really, it's not an easy one. So I can understand the struggle, but I think we have to start small. So I think private sector's value is, private sector doesn't have the, some corporations are large, but, there's a large SME sector in every country. We can come in, step in and do small projects like what we are trying to do. And then, do it with the bigger framework in mind. Because if we do it like, okay, yeah, there's 17 disparate projects, then to Natina's point earlier, we need to collaborate among ourselves, right? That is step one. And I think private sector's role is really to drive that collaboration with academia within the private sector. And then, yeah, so I think I'm talking too long, but I just wanted to make this point.
No, thank you, Ed. And I think, yeah, you also mentioned really important, I think, ideas that sometimes maybe from civil society, maybe we're not considering. And I think that's why fostering these type of conversations is so important, but also to bring the perspective of the private sector and the needs that they are seeing on the market, also to see how we can kind of match everyone's perspective around data, government data, data sharing, etc. And just before I open up the floor for questions, but also for reactions from the panel, I will make you one last question, Nico, in terms of giving the global discussions around frameworks such as GDC, the AI EU Act, for example, or even the DPI safeguard principles that they presented yesterday. What key principles should be prioritized to ensure the integration of AI and DPI initiatives are inclusive, equitable, and sustainable in diverse regional contexts?
Okay, I think that's a good point. I think that you mentioned kind of different phenomena, but there is a common challenge. When we talk about, for example, the global agreements, we have the challenge and how we operationalize it and make it in reality in a local context. For example, mentioning the EU Act is what we call the Brussels effect, these very strong regulatory frameworks that then are taken as reference by other countries, many times without taking into account that they have their own particularities. So I think that the common challenge there is how to transform these global agreements or directions into local action. And I think that to do so, there are different approaches that can be taken, some of them more into a process approach and some of them more into a content approach on how to make that happen. When we talk about process, we talk about, it's always mentioned in global debates, the inclusion of often excluded voices or global south voices into the making of this document of general frameworks, which is always easy because of the different capacities of the countries or the different involvement in global fora. But those kind of processes will make it easier if those local considerations are taken into account when building these general frameworks. Will be easier to apply them and to really get to inclusive frameworks, policies, and practices. And then when we talk about content, I think that there is a big job. Okay, to get to the general agreements, you need to be like broad, to have broad principles, broad agreements, not go into the details on how to make that in practice, because in that way it would be very difficult to get to this general agreement. So then, okay, we have them, we have the Digital Global Compact, we have the AI recommendation of the UNESCO, we have a lot of them. And then it comes to regional or country level. And then I think, even though the idea, the objective is to go to the particularities of each country, I think that keeping a general and holistic point of view is also important to identify the particularities of each of the region. And what I mean with this, for example, we have been discussing yesterday and today the gigantic potential that DPI have to democratize different resources, opportunities, etc., from government access to government service, and to also to foster, as Ed was mentioning, the market competitiveness. We have also seen in different international agreements that in the digital realm, we have seen a very powerful economic and capacity concentration. And to have really inclusive policies in this sphere, we need to tackle these concentrations. And DPI and open data and open models that can support those DPI are important to have to get this also to this democratization of the economic markets and field. So when we talk about, when I was saying, look at the big picture, this is something also that we can take from the responsible AI agenda, which is also very, very pushy in saying, putting into agenda, okay, let's look at all the AI life cycle of all the AI value chain. When we are talking about open data or DPI, are we thinking where the data is going to be hosted? Who are the owners of the data centers? Are we in this really, I would say, well-intentioned actions toward making easier the life of the people? Are we reinforcing the economic dependency of the global south countries, or we are taking paths to be more independent in that way? So I think that bringing this big picture will help us to draw better local diagnosis and regional diagnosis that can help us to get to this more operationalized way on how to apply these general principles, general agreements. And to finalize, going back to the principles that you were mentioning, as I was saying previously, there are a lot of common principles in this agenda, in this way of work, etc., in this modular way of thinking. And I think that public participation and awareness is a key principle here, even though we know that DPI, for example, the objective is to solve the problems of the people. It's very important that people know what happened with their data, the rights that they have, and also it's very interconnected with the need of upskilling the people. One of the unified consensus of the region is that we need to improve the digital skills of the people. So having strong public participation, awareness campaigns, and programs is very important to build trust in these technologies, in these solutions that we are building people-centered. And this, I think, should go along with the transparency. Transparency is also very important when governments deploy this in alliance with private sector, academy, etc. And last but not least, I think that the principle of international cooperation is key. Also, to translate these global agreements or norms into more regional focus approach, keeping the international cooperation to have all the sides working together toward these shared objectives that we have set together.
Thanks, Nico. And also, I think something that you mentioned that is key, and I think we have been like hearing in different forms, it's this possibility and the need to transform those global agreements into local realities, resources also, and context. No, I think that's key and part of the conversation that we're having in these days. And I really like how you frame it in terms of the possibility of the DPIs as a democratizing tool. And I think in these moments, we need a lot of like hope, and we need to be creative, and how DPIs opens like a new road in terms of how we're gonna not just solve things, but also change what's needed to be changed. And before opening up the floor for questions, I will also let my panelists, my co-panelists, if you want to react to something that someone previously mentioned, please feel free. I don't know if you wanna maybe, I don't know, also more Muchiri and Ed that are online or here who wants to start maybe to react to. So we have maybe just like a short 3-minute each conversation before we open up the floor for questions.
Well, first of all, I have to remember what everyone said. But Nico, you're talking about this issue of these sort of global frameworks and principles. And I think one of the important things for us as a region is how we adapt those in a meaningful way so that they are appropriate and fit for purpose. So for instance, I know in the Caribbean and in Jamaica in particular, even though Ed says that he's impressed by the specific citizen rights within Jamaica's Data Protection Act, but I think the extent to which we have adopted GDPR and all of its trimmings makes it actually quite burdensome. And I think one of the studies we want to do here is try and understand what is the economic cost of adopting those principles from other jurisdictions, even if they're seen as global standards. And I know, Ed, at some point, I don't know if that becomes part of this discussion, but we've been discussing the idea of harmonized digital policies where you can consolidate all of these things into a single policy that has, obviously would need to have multiple parameters to fit different contexts. I know you speak about that as an ambition. I don't know yet how that is going to happen, but certainly we've taken the first step. We demonstrated this morning our policy repository for the Caribbean, where we've literally gone across the region and captured as much as possible legislative artifacts, policies, strategies, guidelines, and so forth. This issue of policies And I use the term policy as a placeholder because it could be legislative or it could be guidelines or it could be strategy. But we have to get that right. And getting that right is both a function of adopting international standards, but also adapting them to our context so that they are useful and practical. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah, I think that you make a great point there. And also, it's well known that we are talking about these transnational technologies that doesn't, if you see all the value chain from the mineral extraction to human resources, etc., it happened all around the world. So sometimes it's difficult to focus only in one territory. But I agree with you when importing or when inspiring some legislation into other existing, the implementing phase is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Are there the resources in place, is the capacity in place to implement that, or is that matching the economic needs of that territory? So I think that some feel that is not always so discussed and brought to the table about the implementation of those frameworks that is really crucial when talk about make them meaningful, as you say, for the local context. And I really agree that the regional approaches are extremely useful to do so.
Nati, please.
I'll just go with a really small advertising, because the Open Data Charter, alongside with Civic Compass, actually we have a research project that has already, the report has already been published of the impact of GDPR in Latin America. So it's not even the translation of that legislation into national regulatory frameworks, but it's like GDPR, the European law, as data flows, how that is impacting actually policies in Latin America. And we would love to add chapters on how that is impacting the Caribbean, how that is impacting Africa, because data flows. So every piece of legislation actually impacts elsewhere.
Totally. I don't know, Mushiri or Ed, if you want to add something or.
Sure. Yeah. No. Love to add to that. So first off, thank you all. Really appreciate Nico, Tina, and Maurice, and all the comments there. I think the key question, one of the questions, I think Maurice, you mentioned about showcase of the repository, and where we can take it further. So I think one of the plans again for this quarter, right, between now and June, for us is to collaborate. The initial team has been identified. I think we have to sort of circle back on that. But the goal of that team would be to expand on what the work is that's already been done and make that global in terms of going beyond the regional data set and make sure the data set is global. And then the rationalization, to your point, how do we make sure that the economic cost doesn't become burdensome? And that's the hard part. And part of that is, I think, and the question is, because if it becomes a policy debate, whose policy is correct, we're never going to be done with this project or any project for that matter, right? And we can calculate cost till the cows come home, right? It's not going to get actionable, right? 2 years will go by the time we calculate all the costs, right? So the question is, how do we make it actionable and real today? And how do we make sure that all conflicts of policy don't come up, right? Or then they come up, we have an easy way of mediation and resolution. So maybe we take, and I think you mentioned this, or someone else in the room mentioned this when we talked about DPI safeguard principles. So I think that's one example, but maybe just coming up with a unified set of principles over policy is a step one. So even as we do this rationalization effort, because foundationally people craft their policy statements based on their lens, their economy, their perspectives, and all the other tariffs and several other dynamics at play there, right? But if the principles are the principles, the first principles on which all natural principles on which physics works or humanity works. So if we can go back to, okay, what are our first common principles? The rules of, Martin Luther King said, right? The rules of man versus the rules of, the nature. So if we follow the rules of nature and we define what those first principles are, and we say, okay, that can be no disagreement, right? Biology is the biology, math is the math, physics is the physics. So if we can agree on, therefore, as a consequence of these foundational knowledge assets that we have in different sciences, what are the foundational principles that any data or any sharing or anything has to adhere on? And then the policy rationalization becomes a slightly easier task. It's still complicated, but slightly easier. And then the debates go away because you can always point back to a principle. So that's the first piece. And then the second question is, how can we collaborate further? Definitely, as WDG.org will continue to invest very closely with UV to continue down this path, which of course, the research and analysis will bring some of the dimensions of economic cost and so forth. But really going down the path of quickly creating that rationalized policy, completing the global database, so it's more than Caribbean, and then B, building out the unified policy, and then bringing in the broader group here, even the panelists here in the room, but there have been several other panels and people within this summit. So bringing all of them together. So there's a core working group which will draft the initial global unified version, which is principle oriented, not policy oriented. It sort of complies to policy in some sense. And wherever there are disputes with what we think the policies are wrong, we call that out publicly. But then we bring this entire, like the DPI summit had so many great minds, and they're all passionate about the same topic. So they're all part of like a quasi extended group reviewing that policy. So now it's more than just 6 people in a room or 7 people in a room trying to draft a document. And part of the thing that I've been doing here I've been at the TED conference, part of the reason here was not only to meet Sam Altman, but meet several other people who care about and pro bono lawyers who are interested. So I'm meeting with one of the firms later today to say, how can we bring, because this should be pro bono by the private sector. So going back again, how can private sector help? If you're a lawyer, please support pro bono this activity, because this is for the greater good. So that's kind of where my head is on this.
Thank you, Ed. I think, participatory processes and to enhance participation of multidisciplines, I think super necessary. Mushiri, I don't know if I think you're back there, and if you want to add something.
No, I'm nothing to add. Everyone has said such amazing things. Happy to hear what people think and input from the participants.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have some questions online. I know Biole is helping us with that. Biole, do you have some questions on the chat?
Hi, Gloria. Yes, we have some questions. We have a comment from Yacine. He said, effective collaboration requires resources to create bridges, articulate, facilitate, and share vision, design collaborative action. Those in the day-to-day have no extra time on top of their own projects and actions, and effective cooperation requires resources. And I'm just going to read another question. How would you, from Amy K., how would you define open data? What do you believe will be the most helpful definition and the most likely?
Super. And I think we can, Nati, do you want to take that one? And Yacine, was it your comment? Do you want to add something that you're here with us?
Yeah, because the first commentary is in the room.
Yeah, he's in the room.
Yeah, no, it was more a comment because we all say all the time we want to collaborate, we have to collaborate, we should collaborate, let's collaborate. But collaboration in itself, it's a lot of time and resource and work. So just make sure that when we say we want to collaborate, we have to add to our budgets that line. Thank you.
Yeah, we need to have that conversation with the funders also, because sometimes they do not like that line in the budget. And meaningful collaboration actually takes resources, time. If you really want to be able to do a meaningful participation, you need to do research, collaborate with other organizations to bring in your voice. So it actually takes time, which means it takes resources. So for every funder out there, please. And then on the question of open data, there is this one definition from the open data community that has been around for a long time now that is actually, it was actually coined by a collaborative process with Open Knowledge Foundation. And they are going through a redefinition of what open data is, a participatory process of that. So I don't have a proper answer right now because that process is ongoing, but it would be great for everybody in the room and in the virtual room to join that process, because we do need to rethink what we say, like Ed said, the ontology. And I think that process is very important. We do have the Open Data Charter principles, and we did a revision of the principles in 2018. We should be going through another one next year to see if they're still sound, and I will probably have a better answer next year then.
Great. I will just jump super quickly in terms of also adding to that and connected with Ilda's work. Also, when we think about open data, I think, yeah, we have like this academic definition, but it's definitely like getting kind of short in terms of the new reality. And I think also in terms of thinking outside of the box, I think concepts need to evolve, and that's super necessary. And I think we need to think bigger when we talk about open data. And obviously we need to connect that with the role of the private sector and the role that the private sector now is having with AI development. So I think, yeah, we need to adapt to new times. Yeah.
And I'll just ask one question. I'm going to ask you, Natty, because I mean, open data has been, to a large extent, the Open Data Charter has been the custodian of open data conceptually, principle-wise, and a lot of the derivative activities. And we have had challenges with open data in terms of gaining traction with the public sector and with governments. And I guess my question is, are we at a point in time when we should be rebranding open data as a digital public good and connecting it to the larger DPI conversation? Because there certainly seems to be a receptiveness to DPGs as building blocks of the digital public infrastructure. And data is one of those critical building blocks for which this infrastructure is going to be found wanting, right? Especially those public data assets. And should we be looking at a rebrand from open data to data as a digital public good?
That's a really good question. And I don't think rebranding is exactly what we need. Like open data is open data. We are going through the redefinition, but I do think that open data was once, like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, the cool kid in town, and everybody was talking about it. Every government wanted to have an open data portal. Everybody started publishing whatever they could just to have a check to have that the open data portal, because everybody had one. And then new digital conversations starting rising, and open data was kind of mixed within the bowl of digital policies, and we kind of lost a bit of traction. But the one thing that I'm seeing from like 2 years on is that open data is once again back into the conversation because of the need of the conversation around data governance. And the whole life cycle of data, we understand that not every single data set can be published, and that's understandable. There's privacy issues, national security issues. But I think we still need to keep the open data conversation going within the data governance conversations. So if the public data, if the data that is being created by government can be published at some point of its life cycle, that should be embedded into the construction of the data governance framework and the data infrastructure. So when we're thinking about, for example, interoperability platforms, as I said, that can be embedded into the design and the implementation of the interoperability platform. Should that data set, or can that data set be open? That should be embedded into that design, so that we are not repeating the efforts that we did trying to get legacy systems to be the way that we publish open data. So I don't think rebranding is, but I'm here. Like the conversation around open data is happening also, and I think should be happening within the DPI conversation and the AI conversation. Actually, we applied for one of our signature tools of the Open Data Charter tools are the Open Up Guides, which are guides that help promote thematic open data policies. And we actually applied one of the Open Up Guides to be part of the DPG platform, and we are waiting for the confirmation. But we do think that there's open data policies, open data tools that are already DPGs without the branding. So maybe the tools, we can rebrand the tools. I do think that we need to keep the open data kind of concept still there in the conversations.
Thank you. And I don't know if we have any questions here in the room. Yeah, please. Just one sec so the people online can hear you.
Actually, it's a comment. Maurice, I fully appreciate your concern about the importation of external models. I do think, though, that as you look at the cost of data protection, we have to be bolder and look at the opportunity cost of not having in place a framework which moves us in the direction of valuing individual data with the possibility of proprietary rights. So I just wanted to extend your thinking because it needs some balance. That interrogation you're suggesting is very important, but it would be incomplete in a digital economy and society.
No, I think he's taken my point and extended it further down the road. So I fully concur. Fully concur.
Super. Thank you. And I think just to respect people online's time because they joined very on time previously. So I will thank here all the participants, but also the participants online for joining us. And I think this is a super relevant conversation. Let's keep this dialogue open. I think it's necessary to enhance and to promote the intersection of the conversation of open data, AI, DPIs. And I think obviously in terms of, yeah, we need to collaborate more, but also we need to start thinking how we're gonna collaborate more and how we manage to get the resources, the time, and specific concrete plans to make that a reality. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Nati, Nico, Maurice, Muchiri, and Ed. It was a pleasure. And please contact us. We are all online. So if you have any further questions or if we can continue this conversation in other spaces. So in name of the D4D network, also thanks to our hosts. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.